We are live now. So, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Pigskin Addicts channel. Pigskin Addicts here. I'm joined today by some special guests, very, very special guests. The Lightning Round podcast. Garrett and Jamie are here. Thank you guys so much for joining me here. And yeah, let's get right into it. So, the first thing that I wanted to talk about, it was going to be the Drew Tranquil stuff, but Austin Eckler, he had this interview. I was Chris Long on Chris Long's podcast. Um, he talked about his displeasure with his salary right now. And I understand everything that he was saying. I don't think he did himself any favors with the fans, though, just coming out and being as candid as he was. I want to get you guys' thoughts on that, and I want to kind of predict what's going to happen with the situation. Does he stay? Does he go? Do the Chargers feel pressure to move him? What's going on with Austin Eckler?
I think we have the same
You want to go
opinion.
ahead, Garrett?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have pretty much the same opinion on this. So, it just seems like there's no real leverage for Eckler. You can't really blame him for trying to get a new deal. He deserves it. Right now, the Chargers have pinned him in the kind of like James Conner range of contracts, and they obviously believe they're a tier above that. And I don't know if you can blame them. And the tier above that is the guys that are getting that double digits numbers. So I think
Right.
there's got to be some kind of middle ground there, but Eckler wants to be paid what he's worth, and the Chargers don't want to pay a aging 28-year-old running back serious cash, and you can't blame them for that either. So you can see it from both sides, but really, it's if Eckler can and their team can really find a trade worth doing for the Chargers. And in my mind, I think that Eckler stays. I don't think he's got the leverage, and I think he's going to have to come back and play for 2023, because if he doesn't, then he's going to have to sit out a full year. He's going to lose money. He's going to get a year older, and he's going to be a year away from football. So I think all in all, at the end of the day, they're going to end up keeping Eckler.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Garrett said. I think, big picture, you're looking at Eckler doing what's best for him. He's trying to get that pay increase, looking for those additional guarantees, which we know is the end-all, be-all of NFL contracts. And his guarantees have dried up, so he doesn't want to play without those. You've got the team looking at him saying, look, you're almost 28 years old. We took care of you on the first deal. You probably got paid above market value on the first deal without having really proven yourself. And we hear you that you want guarantees, but we've got to take care of Herbert. We've got other needs we've got to address. You play a position that is not a premium position. We're not in a position to throw that kind of money at you. So if you want an extension, we'll give you an extension, but it's not going to be what you want. And I think both sides are holding firm. I think they're both doing what's best for business on each of their sides. You can't really blame either one for doing things the way they're doing them. I think, in terms of the interview, I watched probably the first half of it, and I got kind of tired of it and turned it off. He was kind of annoying me. But I think if you look at the interview, really, I don't think he did himself any favors, like you said. He wasn't totally honest. He said in that interview that the team put a deadline on negotiations. We know that's not true. We know his team put a deadline on the negotiations for the start of free agency. So he's already not really being totally genuine. And he talked about wanting to be in LA long term, but he also said several times, I don't care what city it is. I just want to get paid. So, he's being honest. Credit to him, I guess. He hasn't done himself any favors in a lot of his media appearances in the last couple of months. There were a lot of feelings that he threw Herbert under the bus when he was on with Skip and Shannon before the Super Bowl. I don't really think that was his intent, but that's how a lot of people interpreted it. He wasn't really specific enough in defending Herbert, I think, in a lot of people's eyes. And I think here in this interview, he's just showing himself. I mean, he's, like I said, he's doing what he needs to do to get what he thinks he deserves, and you got to respect that. But I think he's maybe talking a little bit too much, and I don't think he really did himself any favors in the interview.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think this could do something. I don't think it's all that bad in the locker room, but I think this can rub some guys maybe the wrong way, especially because of the fantasy stuff that he's very very candid about that as well too. The fantasy running back stuff that also throws people off when you're you seem like a me first guy and not a team guy, right? When you're talking about and all this stuff, and I think he has like a fantasy podcast that he does during the season, right? Like every
Yep.
Thursday or something like that.
Mhm.
So
I
I
think
don't
so.
think that he's doing himself a lot of favors. So you guys see him staying in LA. There's no pressure on the Chargers to get him out.
I don't think there's any pressure. I think the Chargers have all the cards right now. And he can talk about getting what he deserves and pushing the envelope at the draft and all the stuff that we've been hearing. But at the end of the day, the Chargers hold all the cards. He can't hold out. He's got to play in at least 6 games in order for his contract to expire at the end of the year. Otherwise, per the CBA, it tolls, which means they basically hit pause on the contract, and he would have to come back next year on the same deal at 29, and he'd be looking at not hitting the market until he's 30, and that's assuming they don't want to franchise tag him. So they could conceivably control him for 2 or 3 more years with the franchise tag. He doesn't really have a whole lot of cards to play. He really doesn't have any leverage at all. I don't know that this is really a locker room issue. I mean, all these guys want to get paid. They're all looking out for themselves financially. I think that, and most of these guys, more often than not, NFL players aren't really interested in messing with somebody else's money. So I don't know that anybody's really going to look at him and say it's a me first thing. I think, worst case scenario, he probably sits out most or all of training camp and the preseason, and he wouldn't have played in the preseason anyway. Incurs some fines, and he's probably back week 1 or week 2 and plays out the rest of the year on the contract, just because he's got to at least be on the active roster. And I don't think sitting out at 28 and maybe hitting the market at 29, really does him any favors if he doesn't play this year. So he's really in a tough spot. It's not like Gordon, or Melvin Gordon was 24, 25, hitting free agency and looking for that second big deal. He's looking for his 3rd contract. He's going to be 29 next year. He has to play. I just don't see how it turns out any other way. I doubt the Chargers are going to get an offer that makes sense for them. So I think they hold on to him.
Yeah, and I think that's the other rub here for Austin Eckler is that not only is he getting up in age, but he's got to find not only a team that's interested and willing to give the Chargers what they want in draft compensation, but then that team then has to pay Austin Eckler what he wants. And so there's a lot of things going against Austin Eckler, and I don't know that he's going to find that suitor. And now, I was going to say it's going to be the Lightning Round podcast because Jamie and I were there for a second. But
sorry about that. My camera is frozen. It's doing some weird stuff. So yeah, I'm fixing it. But go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, it just seems like Chargers have all the leverage. Eckler's getting older. There's no real reason to pull a trigger on a trade. If they do, they got to get enough draft compensation that they feel it's worth giving up a running back that, quite frankly, gave you almost all of your touchdowns last year, a very integral part of your offense. Then you get the draft compensation. Then that team's got to pay Eckler, and you got to assume Eckler's going to want a couple years anyway. So it's not just let's get Eckler and give him 10, 12 million for a year. They got to extend him. So, I think it's all stacked up against Eckler, and really he's losing all of his leverage. So to me, if you're a betting man, you got to assume that Eckler will be back with the Chargers because he just cannot sit out, like we mentioned.
Right. Yeah, I definitely I agree. He has no real leverage, and I think that's the thing that's really grinding his gears, and he seemed to be very I don't want to say upset, but he seemed to be annoyed listening to the interview, Jamie, and I didn't listen to the whole thing either because I was like, what? Like it's to be coming out of nowhere. I get that everybody wants to be paid, but to me the timing was just off, and it's not doing him any favors right now. He seems to have had a good relationship with the Chargers his entire time there. It's kind of off-putting to see him kind of start to self-destruct, right, as far as the relationship between him and the team. So it wasn't a great look for him with that interview.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think, you can't blame him. I also think if you're really looking at the timing of it. I mean, there weren't a lot of star running backs in free agency that were available. There were a lot of like complementary pieces. So if you're him and his agent, and you're not expecting the market reset that we've seen, at the running back position, at the linebacker position, at the safety position, at the tight end position, if you're not expecting that shift in the market, and the team's trying to reset the market, then you're looking at it saying, "Wow, we're probably the most productive running back available, even though it's by trade. We might be able to force our hand and get paid here." And then the market shifts, and now he's stuck because he's demanded a trade. He's looking for a contract extension. The market isn't where he thought it was. So they mistimed the request in that respect. But in terms of his productivity the last 2 years and what he probably expected the running back market to look like, and what he thought those guys were going to get paid, you can see kind of some of the logic of, hey, 38 touchdowns in the last 2 years, pay me. And like we said, you really can't blame him for going that route. I just think, he's a volume-based guy. Yes, they built the offense around him in the red zone because he was the best running back on the roster, and they're more efficient when he gets the ball in the red zone. He's not really scoring outside of the red zone. He's not really putting up huge rushing totals. And they I think they gave him an avenue by throwing him the ball over 100 times last year to say, hey, I'm basically a wide receiver playing running back. Pay me.
Right.
And thank you, Joe Lombardi, for that, by the way. That's all you. But yeah, I think it made sense for him on paper before he saw how the market unfolded. And then the market unfolded, and now he's kind of stuck. And now it seems like he's trying to do some pretty poor damage control.
Right. And to transition here, speaking of the market, the Drew Tranquil thing. Now, before all this extra stuff came up, to me, that was going to be the first thing that I went to. The Tranquil stuff. We seen it over the weekend. Information that came out, right? Did he get an offer from the Chargers? Right? Did he not get an offer from the Chargers? There was a lot of information going out. So as far as the clarification on the Drew Tranquil contract, was he offered anything by the Chargers? Or did they let him walk, and did he just, find himself in Kansas City? What do you guys say about that, Garrett?
It's pretty clear that they offered him a deal. He declined it. Chargers thought it was a fair deal. It was a 2-year deal. It was worth over $6 million per year. He thought that his market value was higher than that. So he hit the free agent market. 5 days into free agency, he realized that he couldn't get that on the open market. He went back to the Chargers. Chargers offered him a deal. Their deal then came down because obviously the market had changed at that point. And their deal was a 1-year deal, and it was a max value of $4 million. And he took it around and shopped that contract and said, here's what I've got on the table. Can you offer something better? And Kansas City did. So he went to Kansas City. It's pretty easy. If you connect the dots with everything else you're hearing, that's the way it unfolded. And it happened a lot this offseason. I don't know if it kind of felt like the GMs colluded in bringing down a lot of these player position markets, because guys were not getting paid what they should have been getting paid in previous free agent periods. But, Tranquil obviously felt like he might have overplayed his hand, or the Chargers maybe felt like he overplayed his hand a little bit. He gambled on himself. You can't blame him for that. But then quickly realized that there wasn't the market that he thought he'd have. And so he got a shorter deal with the Chargers, and he ended up using that to leverage a better deal from Kansas City. I wouldn't say it's a better situation, because it seems like he's going to be a backup in Kansas City with a play incentives that I'm not sure he's going to reach to get that full value of that $5 million of that contract. But he absolutely was offered a deal before free agency. The Chargers wanted to get Drew Tranquil re-signed and wanted to get Trey Pipkins re-signed before they both hit free agency. Both of them tested the market. Trey Pipkins came back. They got that deal done. Drew Tranquil came back. They couldn't get that deal done. It's pretty clear if you really connect the dots there.
Right. Yeah. And it does seem.
Yeah. And we were told.
Sorry about that, Jamie. Go ahead.
Well, that's okay. I was just going to say we were told early on that Tranquil, like Garrett said, Tranquil and Pipkins were priorities for Chargers in free agency. Those were their top two in-house priorities. So for them to be in-house priorities and for Drew not to get an offer really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think, part of it was Drew went out and tested the market. They wound up giving that money to Kendricks, and the market reset itself. If you looked at the linebacker market heading into free agency, it's kind of a weird market. There were a handful of guys making between $6 and $8 million. There really wasn't a true middle tier. And then it jumped from $8 million to like $12 million plus. And it was pretty clear Drew wasn't that guy who was going to be making $12 million a year. He probably wasn't going to get a 4 or 5 year deal either, just because he'd only had one good year. So you got to figure teams were going to hedge their bets. And then you start seeing all these linebacker contracts come in, $5.5, $6.5, $7 million. Like Garrett said, you can't prove collusion, but there was an eerie similarity between every single linebacker contract signed last week in the early part of free agency. It's a pretty clear indication that the teams were focused on creating a middle market for the linebackers. And it happened, I mentioned it earlier, it happened at linebacker, it happened at running back, it happened at safety, and it's happening at tight end. They're really driving these prices down on these non-premium positions. And Drew got caught up in that. I'm sure he thought he was going to get a 3 or 4 year deal for $8 to $10 million. That didn't materialize. And when he came back, the team said, you know what? We were wrong on the market. We thought we made you a fair offer. It wasn't as fair as we thought. Here's the new one. And I'm sure his ego was a little bit bruised, probably a little bit embarrassed that he walked away from, $6.5 million a year over 2 years with probably some pretty hefty guarantees. And he decided that he was insulted and he was going to go shop that deal and find a deal somewhere else. And that's what he did. And you can't blame him. He got more incentives from KC. Will he reach those incentives? Debatable, depending on how much playing time he's getting. He could find himself arguably being almost strictly a special teams player, which is something he's really good at. Yeah. Or he could maybe find himself in a rotation at linebacker. He's not going to be on the field every play like he was for the Chargers. So those opportunities to earn those incentives are probably not as great as they would have been here. And even if he hits that number, he basically wind up costing himself like $7 or $8 million. So look at it how you will, but it seems like he got some bad advice. That market shifted pretty seriously in a way that they probably didn't expect, and he got left holding and eventually fumbling the bag. Mm-hmm. And a lot of guys did. It wasn't just him. It happened to a lot of people.
Yeah, and just a quick on the numbers, it was just under 6.5. It was 6.25. They offered him a 2-year, $12.5 million deal before free agency. So it was just under 6.5. He ends up taking 5 if he can reach those incentives for 1 year. So he took the long-term 2-year, longer term than what he got, and ended up getting a max value of 5, which, like Jamie and I both mentioned, I'm not sure he's going to be able to hit.
Right. Yeah, he's going to be behind some pretty good linebackers, Willie Gay and Bolton, right? Nick Bolton. So both of those guys are really, really good. And they're 3-down linebackers too, because they're so fast and athletic. So yeah, it's not a great position for him to hit those incentives. So some of the information seemed like it didn't make sense to me that the Chargers will go out and sign an older Eric Kendricks, right? I think he's still productive. I think he's still good, but it doesn't make sense to give him that money and let Drew Tranquil walk without an offer as well, too. So yeah, I mean, just like you guys said, you connect the dots. It makes sense why they would, offer him that. And then, he's going to go out and try to play his hand and see if he can get more money elsewhere. It is interesting too. It's an interesting thing. The collusion, I've been tweeting about that. And to me, it seems like what do you guys think that is? Do you guys think it's a function of the DeShaun Watson deal, them trying to completely squash like guaranteed deals and things like that? But it does seem to be collusion. I have never seen a market drive down player prices so much. You look at the Dalton Schultz deal yesterday, right? His 1 year up to $9 million, right? I don't even know what the base number is. It's probably $5 or $6 million, right? This is weird. This is a very, very weird free agency period. What do you guys think is going on? Is it because of Deshaun Watson? Do the owners want to just completely stop any momentum before it gets started?
I don't know that it's a Deshaun Watson related necessarily. I think Deshaun Watson was kind of a unique animal just because the Browns were desperate and they basically had to give him whatever they wanted to have him come to Cleveland. So I think that was kind of an outlier. And I think what you're seeing more with Lamar Jackson is a reflection of what happened with Deshaun Watson. I think if you look at the markets where you started to see some depression in value and where you started to see things settle down a little bit, those positions did not have like a true middle tier. They didn't have a secondary or a tertiary tier in those particular positional markets. Looking at right tackle, there was a bunch of guys making $5 million or less, but they were all on their rookie contracts. And there were a couple guys who were making $6, $7, $8 million. Most of those guys were veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And then it jumped to like 12 or 13 million. There really wasn't anything in the middle. And the Chargers and the Chiefs and some of these teams that signed offensive tackles, they created a more firm middle tier in that $7 to $9 million range, which I think the market needed. Did they collude? Are they all on the same page? I mean, you can't prove it, but just like with the linebackers, some of those contracts are eerily similar. And collusion is almost impossible to prove, but
yeah,
it certainly looks like there is a concerted or coordinated effort to create middle tiers in some of those markets. It's the same thing in the safety market. Guys making 5, 6, 7 million, then guys making 10 or more, not a whole lot in the middle. Same thing with linebackers, same thing with running back. I think it's just them redefining different tiers of players in those positions and trying to create a more firm middle market, so guys just aren't asking for top of the market deals when they hit the market.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I totally agree with Jamie. It's all about that kind of middle market. You're going to look at a lot of these guys, and when you look at this free agent class, there weren't really top end. They got to reset the market type players in my mind. I mean, Javon Hargrave was the guy who was kind of the marquee guy in this whole free agent class. So yeah, I mean, it feels like teams were just kind of moving and resetting that middle and going, look, you're not worth top end money. Look at these players. These are, franchise cornerstones. You are a bona fide role player, or you're a high, you're a starter, but you're not a high end starter or a Pro Bowler. There weren't a lot of that in that class. So they kind of were finding somewhere in the middle, and collusion's really hard to prove. But with 32 multimillionaire / billionaires all moving in the same direction, that's pretty hard to do. That's like trying to get like 32 kindergarten kids to go to like one part of a room. Near impossible. So I would say there's definitely something up there.
Yeah, it does. It does seem
Yeah.
like there's something up. Yeah, it does. Go ahead, Jamie. Did you want to chime in there?
Oh, I was just going to agree with Derek. I said I agree. I feel like it's, like I said, they're establishing that middle market, and I think when you've got 32 guys who are as powerful as the NFL owners are, all moving in the same direction at the same time in the same offseason after years and years of just throwing and burning money at people, it's a little bit too big of a coincidence to think it's a coincidence. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and it's advantageous for teams, but the players are they're really getting the short end of this. And I think a lot of this has to do with the NFLPA, right? They are probably the weakest union as far as professional sports goes. They're the biggest, right? But they're the weakest, right? And they really don't have any power to throw around. So I think the collective bargaining, when that comes around, whenever it does come around the next time, I think this is something the players are going to have to address and bring to owners' attention, right? Because a lot of these guys are getting priced out, man. They're not making, and not that I'm saying that all these guys should be making top of the market money, but when you look at some of the talents, some of the guys that the Dalton Schultz, the Gardner Johnsons, right? These guys are they're signing very, very mid-level deals. Kind of reminds me of the NBA. The NBA has kind of a mid-level where some of these players go, right? You're not a superstar, but you're not a bench player as well, too, right? You're kind of in the middle. So some of these guys are really, really good. I don't think CJ Gardner Johnson is a mid-level player. I think he is one of the top safeties, but he's being paid as a mid-level player. So I think this is something the players are going to have to address next CBA, the next time that comes up.
Yeah, there's something about, and I agree with you on Gardner Johnson, but there is also something about him. He fell further than his draft grades among teams would indicate. He got traded, even though he was a really good safety, and then now he's not getting his market value. I don't know. Maybe there's something there with him as a player. I'm not sure, or as a person. I don't know, but it just seems like those three things all kind of align. If maybe there's something extra going on, but I totally agree with you. The deals that these guys are getting, especially a lot of these like top 20 guys, you think we're going to get some good contracts. They are way more worth than the deals that they're getting right now.
Yeah, Gardner is an interesting one. Garrett mentioned some of the stuff. We're big fans of his. We wanted the Chargers to draft him a couple years ago when he was in the draft. We thought he was the top safety in that class and would pair with Derwin really well. But you talk about him falling in the draft. He gets traded. He gets cut. He signs a 1-year deal. He had some fights on the field. He seems like he's kind of an instigator on the field. There may be some, obviously I don't know the guy, but maybe some temper or some attitude issues. Maybe he isn't that great in the locker room. Sometimes those things bear themselves out in contracts too, no matter how good the player is. Some teams just look at him like, dude, you're just not worth it. Like we can't bank tens of millions of dollars in guaranteed money on you over the next 3 or 4 years. You're going to burn us. So this is the second team that's gotten rid of him in the last 12 months. One via trade, one via cut. So it seems like there's a little bit more to that picture than just resetting the market. I think a lot of that with him in particular was Chauncey Gardner Johnson related as much as it was market related.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard and I've seen some of the stuff. Yeah. And some of his antics in New Orleans. It kind of didn't sit right with me as well too. But yeah, if that is carrying into the locker room, if that's just not on the field and is carrying into the locker room or into the facility during the week, I can see why a team wouldn't want to pay him. Or give him like the long-term security that he wants. I know he turned down that 3-year contract. He turned it down. But yeah, I can definitely see that, especially with the character issues. So to transition, since we're on the topic of safeties, John Johnson III has been a name that's been thrown around like crazy since free agency started, since he was officially let go by the Browns. I've been somebody I would be okay with him, but I think the Chargers could use this money to possibly resign Kyle Van Noy and to maybe sign a receiver, maybe sign a tight end in free agency or something like that. I just have a real problem with this because you draft Nasir Adderley, right? Was it 4 years ago, second round pick? He was okay, but I don't think he lived up to a second round pick billing. JT Woods, they drafted JT Woods last year. To be in this position, and to me, it doesn't look like he's ready to play. Physically, mentally, he just looks kind of lost out there. So I'm kind of torn on the Chargers spending more money on defense as opposed to offense. What do you guys think about the potential John Johnson signing for the Chargers?
I think they have to do it. And I think you just listed a lot of reasons for why they have to do it. I think the biggest one is JT Woods. As far as we know, now we haven't seen much of him on the field, but as far as what we saw from him in the preseason last year and in his limited snaps during the regular season last year, it seems like you'd be hard-pressed to put him out there as a starter at free safety. And if he's not going to start, and we have yet to see now I'm blank. Mark Webb on the field since they drafted him. Right. He's always hurt. That means that the only safety left on the team to start at free safety is Aloha Gilman. And there are things that Gilman does well, so we're told. I think he's okay playing split safety. I think he can play some dime linebacker. I think he can play in the box as needed. I don't think you want him playing center field on a regular basis, back there by himself, defending the whole field. I think his range is questionable back there. And the ball skills are not terrific. So if you can't put JT Woods back there and you're not totally comfortable putting Aloha Gilman back there, which I don't think anybody should be at this point. He was better last year than he has been, but I don't think he should be starting and playing 60, 70 snaps a game. Then you need somebody back there to hold it down, to take some pressure off of Derwin, because I think Derwin is at his best closer to the line of scrimmage. I think the further he gets away from the line of scrimmage, the less instinctive he gets, and he tends to lose track of some coverage assignments. So I think if you get somebody who can play that deep middle and has some ball skills, I think it makes sense. And I think because of the year that Johnson had in Cleveland, he's probably not going to get more than a 1 or 2 year deal. And I don't think it's going to cost a whole lot of money. I don't think this is like a 3 or 4 year deal with $15-20 million guaranteed. I think you're looking at like a 1 year, $4 or $5 million contract, maybe with some incentives that get him up to 7 or 8, something like that. And I think that's what you're looking for. And I think they need that stabilizing presence in the back end to take some pressure off of Derwin and just know that he knows the system. John Johnson knows the system. He's going to be where he needs to be. And if he's around the football, he's got a chance of making a play on the football, which I don't think they have right now. And I think if you're looking at some of those other positions, we've been big advocates for, I think, 4 years now that they need to draft some speed wide receivers. I would rather see them draft and develop at wide receiver. I think this is a deep enough tight end class that they can get a tight end in the first 3 or 4 rounds and get somebody who's going to contribute. I think there's not much left on the free agent market at tight end that's going to outperform what Gerald Everett did last year. They can bring in somebody behind him to develop behind him and be ready to take over next year when his contract is up. And then you mentioned Kyle Van Noy. I think he's probably going to sit for a while because of his age. He signed late last year. He's probably going to sign late this year. And who knows if he comes back or not, but I don't think signing John Johnson should or would deter them from signing Kyle Van Noy if he's still sitting around after the draft. But ideally, I think you want to draft an edge player too. I think wide receiver, edge, and tight end are 3 positions of major pressing need early in the first 3 or 4 rounds of this draft that they have to address for the future. And you could argue they need to come away with 2 wide receivers out of this draft.
Yeah. So just to add on to what Jamie's saying, because I think they got to sign John Johnson too, is that not only is there nobody in the free agent market that can really help you out, there's some like aging veterans. We had mentioned like Deron Harmon or, like one of those old veteran free safeties. But in the draft, there just isn't a strong starting free safety that you'd be willing to put on the field day one. So I think you got to invest in a guy like John Johnson, because right now the good bet is if you sign a player that has played with Brandon Staley before, you're going to see success with it. Morgan Fox had his best year under Staley, comes back, reunites with Staley, again, has a career year. Bryce Callahan in Denver reunites with Staley, best year with Staley. SJD was with the Rams with Staley, now has his best year as a Charger. I think you give John Johnson, reunite him with Brandon Staley. I think you're going to get the best version of John Johnson in that scenario. You can't go to the free agent market and really get a guy that you'd be more comfortable with than a guy like John Johnson, or draft a guy, in my mind. Then when you talk about like being able to free some cash up for a guy like Kyle Van Noy and bring him back, we've mentioned it on our show before, but there's some moves the Chargers can still make. They can still restructure Corey Linsley. There's a chance they can still cut Dustin Hopkins, even though there's kind of been a rumor floating that Staley wants to have a kicker competition with Cameron Dicker and Dustin Hopkins, but you can free up some cash there. We talked about maybe giving Michael Davis an extension and then cutting that cap for this year to free up some money this year. There's a lot of things you can do in order to make some money and free up some guys if you want to sign them a free agency. But I agree. I think Kyle Van Noy is probably going to sit. He might be a guy you see sign after the draft. But in terms of like a tight end, I agree with Jamie. I think you got to draft a tight end in the first 3 rounds, and I think you can get a starter because it's a pretty deep class. And I don't know that there's a lot of good receiving tight ends that are better than Gerald Everett. I think they could definitely go out and maybe pick up like a Foster Moreau or a Dan Arnold to be your blocking tight end, because of the 3 guys they've got well, 4 with Stone Smart. There isn't really like a real tenacious blocking tight end. There's a couple guys that can pitch in from time to time, but maybe getting a blocking tight end in free agency would make sense. But in terms of a starter looking down the road past Gerald Everett, I think that's in the draft.
Right. Yeah. And I agree.
Yeah,
oh, sorry about that. Go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, just to add on one more thing, another advantage of signing John Johnson is they had to take the green dot off of Derwin last year. Drew Tranquil wore the green dot last year when they took it off of Derwin. There's talk of Eric Kendricks wearing the green dot this year. John Johnson is a guy who wore the green dot when he was with Staley with the Rams. So another option there, veteran leadership, something to help stabilize the back end of the defense. I think it makes a lot of sense on a lot of fronts, and it takes the pressure off of finding a safety in what is, in my opinion, a pretty below average safety class in the draft, and allows you to focus on premium positions in edge, wide receiver, maybe even a corner, things like that early in the draft.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. You guys have successfully convinced me about the John Johnson signing, because I was just so like, should the Chargers spend? But yeah, when you lay it out that way, and especially with him reuniting with Staley, yeah, we've seen those guys. Bryce Callahan, he's another guy that's on time right now. But no, he had a very, very good year with Staley last year. Yeah, he really improved that slot, the nickel position a whole lot from previously with Chris Harris. So yeah, the jump was very, very noticeable. So yeah, I'm convinced now about John Johnson. I was kind of just should the Chargers spend more money on defense, but I do think that they can have they can get that back in kind of solidified, right? Because there's always been some issue with that safety position next to Derwin. There's always, and they've been trying and nothing has seemed to work. But I think John Johnson could really, really solidify that.
Mm-hmm.
We ended here. I don't want to take too much of your guys' time. I just want to know draft picks, the first draft pick, right? Number 21. Who do you guys see? Who do you guys predict at this point right now? Let's say nothing else changes for the Chargers. They go into the draft with this roster. Everybody who's on the roster is on the roster now. Who do they pick? Who do you guys have them picking?
I think right now, based on what they need and some of the things that we've heard, I think there's a pretty good chance that they're probably looking between edge and wide receiver. And I'd like to say they come out of the draft with Zay Flowers from Boston College, because he's exactly what they need. A lot of focus on speed for this offense. I think what they really need is twitch, guys who can make people miss and turn a 5 or 6 yard pass into a 20-yard gain. And that's what Zay Flowers does. He catches the ball really well. He makes people miss. He's like a jitterbug in open space. And he would help, I think, make that short passing game more explosive, but I think he would also help stretch the field a little bit. So Flowers is a guy who I think I would really like to see him come away with.
I would love for that to happen if I were GM. If we're making a prediction of what the Chargers would do, I don't think he meets their threshold. They want taller wide receivers, bigger wide receivers, and that's why I think they would go with Quentin Johnson. I think they would convince themselves that he's got more wiggle than people are giving him credit for, and he could help open up the passing game a little bit more, and he meets that height threshold. So I think they take that TCU wide receiver.
Yeah, that's along the lines that I was thinking too. Quentin Johnson, he's a tree, and the Chargers love those tall wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
If he's not there, though, what do you guys think about? And I was going to make a video on this guy. What about Jordan Addison out of USC? What do you think about him? Is there potential there for the Chargers? Because I think he will be available. He's a little bigger than the other guys as well, too. So I think he might fit in with what the Chargers want to do. He kind of reminds me of Marvin Harrison a little bit. I think he can work the slot, and he can work the outside, the X position as well, too. What do you guys think about Jordan Addison to the Chargers?
I mean, we know they like their USC and UCLA players.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Especially since they moved out. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I think the only thing, Garrett mentioned the size threshold. Addison, he's a little slender. He's kind of thinly built, and he struggles with press coverage a little bit. So I think he'd probably have to play slot for the Chargers, and they've already got a bunch of slot receivers. But I think in terms of the route running and the speed after the catch and the ability to go get the football, I think there are some things that they're likely to like about him. And he's a hometown product in terms of coming from USC, so I'm sure they think that there's marketing potential there. So that wouldn't surprise me terribly.
Yeah, those SoCal players in the draft are definitely a favorite of Telesco. And I could 100%, and admittedly, Jamie and I are going to get into our wide receiver in-depth draft watch coming up in the next couple months before the draft. So we haven't gone a deep dive into these guys, but from what little I've seen of Jordan Addison, I would 100% see a Tom Telesco saying, "Oh, Addison reminds me of a little bit of a guy I used to have, Marvin Harrison." I totally can see that coming down on draft day. But I mean, if we're talking about guys, and again, I haven't done the deep dive, but I would take Addison over Johnson. I'm not a huge Johnson fan. I don't know. I don't love him that high. I've got him probably more towards the top of round 2. But yeah, Jordan Addison, you can't fight against that speed, and I think that's something they need. I know he's got some issues and he's a little light, but I'd be a fan of Jordan Addison. I'd be a fan of Zay Flowers too.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I think the wide receiver position. This is a draft that's going to be very interesting. Some of these smaller guys did not run the greatest 40 times. So I think that a lot of these guys are going to be available. I question if Zay Flowers is going to be there at 21. I see there's a lot of hype, starting to, really come with his name. I've been looking at, some draft stuff over the past week. I'll be surprised if he's there, but I do know, I think Addison will be there. I'm not a fan of Quentin Johnson as well, too. He kind of reminds me of a Kevin White. You guys remember the Kevin White? He kind of reminds me of that a little bit. I don't think he's as big and jacked as Kevin White, but I really don't see it with him. To me, I like Jalen Hyatt. I think if the Chargers were able to draft him in the first, possibly second round, I really, really like Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee.
Yeah. Hyatt's a good speed option. I'm not sure I'd take him at 21. I think there are 3 or 4 wide receivers in this class that are better than him at least. But maybe trade back, maybe trade up in the second. Maybe that's a possibility. But at 21, I feel like, you're getting to the point where you're maybe taking the 5th or 6th best wide receiver in the draft, maybe even a little bit lower, and maybe you get an opportunity to get the 2nd or 3rd best player in another position of need, like cornerback if something falls, like edge if something falls. It's a possibility, but there might be better value at another position.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if we're gonna be there at the 5 or 6, then yes, there's gonna be better value because at that point it's gonna be a question mark at 21, and you kind of need guys who are gonna be able to play within their first couple of years, right? With the salary cap being what it is in 2024 and beyond. So we're gonna need guys who are gonna be able to step in and kind of give you value right away, a la Josh Palmer. So yeah, I just want to thank you guys for coming on here. I don't want to take up too much of your time here. Thank you guys so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate all of your analysis. You guys have successfully convinced me I am for Johnson now. I'm going to be campaigning for that. You got me on board. Definitely got me on board with that. So thank you guys so much, man. I really, really appreciate you guys joining me on my channel.
It is.
You're welcome. It was our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Really our pleasure. We appreciate you contacting us. It's good to see you on Twitter now, and I'm glad we were able to be part of your YouTube stream here. So thanks so much for having us.
Thank you guys so much. All of my subscribers appreciate it as well. To you guys know the Lightning Round podcast, go ahead and go over to their page and give them a subscribe. These guys are really, really good. They know what they're talking about. And they're the vets, right? They're the OGs of this thing. So give them go ahead and give them a follow and show them some love. But again, thank you guys so much for coming on, and we'll end it here until next time. Thank you guys so much.
Anytime, Derek. Thank you.
All right.